Hello, I'm Hannah Hemrich, and
I'm Shelley.
we're going to talk to you today about formative assessment. These are just some words that describe it. All right, so if you did some of our pre-reading, you know that we're going to talk a little bit about genetic engineering. So can someone give me just a 2-sentence definition? What is genetic engineering?
Manual manipulation of DNA.
Good, yeah, manual manipulation of DNA, that's a pretty good way to describe it. We're going to do an activity, and the learning goals of this activity are to be able to identify some applications of genetic engineering, to describe a few of the techniques, and to be able to discuss some of the challenges that genetic engineering professionals might come across. All right, so we're going to do what's called a Who Cares challenge. So your job is to use the computers in front of you, and you're going to find someone who uses genetic engineering and who cares about it. So we're going to go online and search for someone who cares about it, and then find an article that they have published that uses a genetic engineering technique. Right. So we'll give you guys about 5 or so minutes to find that, and then we'll continue with a couple of discussion questions for you to talk about once you find your individuals. So you guys can find someone who does anything in genetic engineering. It doesn't have to be like food or maybe like have someone else find another one. So if you have like another engineer there. So once you find a person, you can find an article that they wrote and try to identify what technique they use.
Oh. Like kids get cancer because of the That's horrible.
The first engineer We looked up 12 bizarre examples of
I just found a root node.
All right, once you have your person who cares about genetic engineering and sort of found one of the techniques that they use, we're going to have you guys discuss for a couple minutes which techniques they used, see if you can describe it to someone else at your table, and then what kind of challenges or ethical considerations do these people face while they're doing this type of research.
Yeah, it's good that people get DNA since we don't have. They're not going to be able to because there's no chance of using it.
I can't find one of how to do that.
Oh, they care about apples, huh?
Yeah. No, I don't know. It's just like consumers' willingness to like buy it and stuff like that. So I can't find an article.
Oh,
But whatever. I'm sure you guys found one.
yeah. Well,
Let's discuss.
Like if it results in something else,
Yeah,
they weren't expecting.
Flavor savers.
So what they did was they actually antisense gene and actually increase the shelf life of the potato. Otherwise. They also show shelf life.
So it just introduce a protein of choice.
Oh, so like you want one person to have
Yeah, or yeah, I don't know
They changed the shelf life of the tomato by the size of it.
So there's
That's the enzyme that actually causes
yeah, it's
I understand that.
oh, but I never thought about as long as it's
Yeah, I mean, where they just focus
the
on like,
mechanism by which it is. That's
More like
yeah, where they focus on
mediated vaccine. You know what I mean? They say like you said, they're going to have mutation ability. So we're going to train you.
so like if
with like you
It's just basically, so it just
different ways to do that, I can look at
That's what it's saying, genetic engineering.
different process.
and what kind of like
it's more like this is like
the stuck it in. That's the part that's stuck it in.
So I was like, it's hard to get like so very to talk about tiny like gold. Somehow that gets like this DNA
All right. Nice job discussing these. You did a good job finding all of these different techniques and coming together and discussing them, describing them to each other. Does anyone have a technique maybe that they hadn't heard of before that they discovered today? Or maybe one that they just find really interesting? Anybody?
I like the zapping things with the like little gold particles. The gene gun. I don't know how it works, but I sound cool.
Okay, okay. And did anyone have any challenges that they saw were really obvious in the particular person that's caring about genetic engineering that they might face?
Well, we looked into gene therapy. Obviously, a challenge would be in inserting genes without causing additional harm to people.
Yeah, good.
Well, we read about this case where they modified scorpion poison so that it didn't hurt people, but it did hurt insects, and then they decided to make cabbage that had scorpion poison in it. And I think the difficulty is going to be no one's going to want to eat scorpion poison cabbages, even if you should be like, look at all this research, it's not going to hurt you. They're just going to hear scorpion poison and be like, I'm not eating that. So, you know, there's some difficulty there.
Nobody eats cabbage anyway.
So, yeah, they didn't pick the best vegetable anyhow.
Some people might also ask, why are we putting our resources into things like that, right? When we have all these other problems that we like, funnel our time and energy.
Well, they
into.
were trying to do it to get rid of herbicide and pesticides. So there was a reason.
Well, that's good at least. All right, so the Who Cares Challenge is an example of an active learning technique that you can use as formative assessment. So what we would do now is we would come together and we would, as instructors, realize how much you have learned about the reading that we had last night. Were you able to apply it to someone else's research and discuss it with one of your classmates? And then we would also hope that you'd be self-assessing. And one way you're doing that is just thinking, okay, am I understanding the article that I'm reading? And another way would be is if we went back to our learning goals. we could have you write down one sentence describing each of the things you learned about those learning goals. And that'd be one way to really easily decide, okay, I was able to do these 3 things just in the last 20 minutes. All right, so we're gonna go a little bit more in depth about what formative assessment is.
Okay. So yeah, that was our activity, and now we kind of want to hear, what you guys think of formative assessment, what's your experience with it. So I'm just going to ask you a couple questions, and you guys can answer them. So the first one is, what do you think distinguishes formative assessment from summative assessment? What do you guys think is like the difference between the two if you were going to describe something summative versus formative? What about, like, what's the purpose of, like, formative assessment versus what's the purpose of summative assessment?
Formative you do throughout to try and diagnose misconceptions or areas where your students are having trouble learning a topic.
Right, yeah.
If you do badly on a formative assessment, then you know what you need to work on. If you do badly on a summative assessment, it's too late to do anything, it'll change your grade. You might know if I retake a class, I'll do this good, but it's too late.
So formative is like helpful throughout for you, for the student. And
Yeah,
summative not.
just to add to that, I was gonna say formative, I can do it more, it's for the students, and summative is for the instructor to evaluate, like, end of term progress.
Okay, so who is using this is different, when it happens is different, formative is throughout, summative is maybe at the end of the section you're doing, at the end of the whole course.
I'd say summative is actually very useful for the students in the sense that it gives them the challenge for them to, if they know it's coming, like a big final exam, then there's no going back to the material getting grade different after that exam. So it's like the challenge for them to goal oriented themselves to do well on it. And that in itself is a good skill for them to build. So it's useful in that aspect, but the bad thing is they don't get to learn what they screwed up on that final or that summative assessment.
But it is kind of motivation and gets them really thinking about things, yeah. Do you guys have any other thoughts? Yeah, I would just say, the purpose is clearly different. Summative assessments, at the end, and maybe the teacher will use them to improve instruction and the next time you teach the class, but you're probably not going to be able to go back to that material and teach those students that didn't learn it. Whereas formative, I would argue you can be doing that all the time. You can constantly improve your teaching, and it's just can be incorporated into your teaching. What do you guys think about how to balance the two? Do you think that there should be more formative or summative? You guys? Yeah.
Maybe like using what he was saying, if they know it's coming, they're preparing for it, so just have more summative assessments throughout the course, so that they're not just waiting for the end of the final to actually look at the material.
So have more summative assessments, you would say?
I would say formative, because summative, if you have a whole lot of them, I think they start to become formative at a certain point, if you have enough of them. But if you just have, a couple, then there's a lot of students who just cram for the stuff. They don't actually learn it, and then after they cram and take the test, they forget.
Yeah.
Like, they don't actually learn in a way that will be useful to them in future courses.
So do you think there's like any harm in giving grades to everything? If you're doing a bunch throughout, but like quizzes or whatever, but then you're giving them a grade, do you think that's helping the students learn, or?
Well, I think it gives us motivation to do it, and if it's just like a couple points here and there, then it probably won't change the grade too much, but they might take it more seriously and not wait till the last minute to cram.
Yeah, so some of the readings that we did talked about how formative assessment is often not graded. And one of the reasons is because it's allowing you to see how successfully your students are picking up the material as you're teaching it. So one really simple way to do formative assessment, which is a little more useful in a smaller class, is just to observe your students. How are they reacting? Are they turning to the person next to them and asking, like, what did she just say? That kind of thing. And then being able to say, like, all right, for the rest of my lesson, I'm going to have to alter it in this way to make sure that I'm getting my point across, or maybe I'll go back to that slide that we did where people aren't understanding. And that's one of the reasons we'll talk a little bit more about this, but active learning, so is basically formative assessment as you're teaching. So Instead of giving a quiz at the end of the class, maybe halfway through the class, you ask everyone to write down one thing they've learned so far. It could be as simple as that. If they can't write anything down, they know they're not learning, and you know that you should probably do a better job in the first half of your lecture.
And just one study I was thinking too, that I was looking at when we were putting this together was, I think it was Black and Williams that did the study, and it was, they accumulated a lot of studies that looked at formative assessment to see basically if it works, if it helps students learn. And they looked at students that had received grades only, students that received comments only on their work, and then students that received both. And the ones that received comments only had improved learning gains and interest, but the other two did not. So that's why I was wondering, like, do grades actually hurt student learning? I mean, maybe like the students that are high achievers, if they get an A, they're like, okay, I've got an A, I'm done, you know, I know everything. So, because I feel like I've encountered that in class before. Okay, so going back to when you're actually doing this in class, what do you guys think is important to keep in mind if you guys are doing formative assessment? Like, we have some ideas about it, but first, I kind of want to hear what you guys have done. What do you think helps kind of make the formative assessment actually improve learning? Anybody?
If you would assess people with formative assessment, you should change what you do based on it. You should just take the assessment and be like, oh, well, okay, and move along.
So use it.
But it defeats the purpose. But I've seen it.
Yeah. Okay, that's definitely a good point.
If you're just asking your students to respond to something and they're having a hard time understanding, like how you respond to them getting an incorrect answer is also really important. So you don't want to do it in a really negative way that brings them down and discourages people from, you know, trying to answer questions.
So keep the environment like kind of safe to ask questions and things. Yeah. You were first.
I think, like you guys are demonstrating, see if they can actually apply the knowledge, so not just regurgitate information, but give them something that they actually have to apply what they should have learned to a new topic.
The activities that you choose are really important for whatever formative assessment is. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, kind of going on what Nick was saying, just I like when I was a TA, I'll ask like the students questions, kind of like as I walk around the room and see how they answer and kind of get an assessment of did they actually grasp what we just talked about or the lesson or that kind of thing.
So just use it really like informally all the time. Just be walking around. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So yeah, some things that we thought were important. Like we did in the beginning of the academic engineering activities, we shared what our learning goals were with you so that maybe you guys could, you knew what you were supposed to get to, right? So if you're not sharing your learning goals with your students, then they don't know where they need to kind of aim for. And I mean, we've been talking about this throughout class, but I think it's especially important for formative assessment. And then providing descriptive feedback. So as I was talking about comments help improve learning gains because they need to know how to improve. And the reading that you guys did, the one that was on formative assessment, talked about 3 questions that are important that you should be able to answer for each student, and that's where are they now, where are they going, and how can they close that gap. So I think really descriptive feedback is important, whether or not you're just talking to a student and saying, okay, well, you get this part, that's great, but you need to work on, you know, this part, connecting concepts or whatever, and maybe this is how you can do it. You can review these readings or do practice problems or whatever. So kind of encompassing all of that when you're talking to your students. And then, yeah, you mentioned the last one, just giving them a good environment, just as we talked about last week, making them comfortable asking questions. You also want them engaged in whatever activity you're doing. So keep the environment. Okay, yeah. So now you guys are going to just talk in your groups about these questions that are what do you actually do in the classroom? So what have you used before in the classroom as formative assessments? How well have they worked? You know, which ones haven't worked? And then what do you think the relationship is between formative assessment and active learning? So we'll give you guys a few minutes to talk about that.
And then so like we'll go have these changes in our learning
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you already know. Okay, yeah, that's cool.
Right, it actually is 2:30, so if you have to leave, feel free. We do have one more slide, that'll be really quick. So sorry to cut your conversation short. So thank you for discussing those again. I heard a couple good things about sort of the difference between actually assessing and active learning, maybe just being an activity to help the learning process move along. And so we kind of are thinking that active learning is a good tool for formative assessment, and it probably depends on how you use it. We do have a couple of examples. We didn't want to have you leave without any actual tools to take with you. So some of the things that are up here are pretty obvious, just like peer evaluation, like we just did with our e-portfolios, or brainstorming can just be a good way to assess where you are in the topic that you're discussing. And then some other ones that are a little more descriptive, so like mini maps would be like having your students do a small concept map after a brief lecture and making sure that they're able to draw connections. So they might give them 5 or 6 words, maybe 10, and have them draw a map of them. Maybe don't tell them how they relate to each other exactly, and then when they're connecting them, they can write on the line, all right, this is how these two things are related, this is how they think they're related, and then maybe you won't give them a grade, but they'll hand it in at the end, and you'll know whether or not your students are able to draw the connections that you're hoping for. Yeah, so do you guys have any questions before we wrap up? Okay, thank you.